Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this story if you love true historical mysteries that still defy explanation. Now, let's travel back to the late 16th century, before the United States existed, when the New World was still an untamed wilderness, and England was desperate to plant its flag across the Atlantic. The year was 1584. Queen Elizabeth I ruled over England, and her empire was hungry for expansion. Spain dominated the Americas, but England wanted its share of glory and gold. Sir Walter Raleigh, a favourite of the Queen and a visionary explorer, was granted a royal charter to claim land in the New World. His mission was simple: establish an English colony that could rival Spain's. Raleigh's first expedition reached the coast of what we now call North Carolina. Have you ever heard of a place that simply vanished? An entire community gone without a trace. No war, no fire, no survivors. Only a single word carved into a wooden post: Croatoan. What happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Was it slaughtered by native tribes, swallowed by the sea, or absorbed into a mysterious civilization that history forgot? Tell me in the comments what you think happened, because this is one of America's oldest and most haunting mysteries. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this story if you love true historical mysteries that still defy explanation. Now, let's travel back to the late 16th century, before the United States existed, when the New World was still an untamed wilderness, and England was desperate to plant its flag across the Atlantic. The year was 1584. Queen Elizabeth I ruled over England, and her empire was hungry for expansion. Spain dominated the Americas, but England wanted its share of glory and gold. Sir Walter Raleigh, a favourite of the Queen and a visionary explorer, was granted a royal charter to claim land in the New World. His mission was simple: establish an English colony that could rival Spain's. Raleigh's first expedition reached the coast of what we now call North Carolina. The explorers described a paradise of lush forests, fertile soil, and friendly native tribes. They named the region Virginia, in honour of their virgin Queen Elizabeth. The English returned home with stories of beauty and abundance, stories that painted the New World as a land of opportunity. It was a tempting promise for dreamers, merchants, and adventurers back in England. 3 years later, in 1587, Raleigh launched his most ambitious mission yet: a permanent colony on Roanoke Island, a small stretch of land nestled between the North Carolina mainland and the Outer Banks. The expedition was led by John White, a skilled artist and mapmaker who had joined previous voyages to the Americas. This time, the mission wasn't about military conquest, it was about building a home. Aboard the ships were 117 English men, women, and children, families hoping to start new lives in a land far from home. Among them was White's daughter, Eleanor Dare, who was pregnant during the voyage. The colony set sail across the Atlantic, leaving behind the cold grey skies of England for the promise of a new beginning. But when they arrived in the summer of 1587, the dream quickly began to unravel. The settlers discovered that an earlier group of Englishmen, left on Roanoke 2 years earlier, had vanished. The fort they'd built was in ruins, overgrown by vines, no sign of the previous inhabitants, only bones, and an eerie silence in the forest. Still, the new colonists pressed on. They rebuilt what they could and began forging fragile alliances with the local native tribes, the Croatoan and the Secatan. At first there was cautious peace, but mistrust simmered beneath the surface. Language barriers, cultural differences, and the colonists' growing desperation soon led to tension. Then in August 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a daughter, the first English child born in the New World. They named her Virginia Dare. Her birth was a symbol of hope, a tiny cry of new life echoing across an uncertain wilderness. Yet that hope was short-lived. The settlers soon faced starvation. Their supplies dwindled, their crops failed, and their relations with nearby tribes grew violent. In desperation, the colonists pleaded with John White to return to England and bring back provisions. White resisted at first. He didn't want to abandon his daughter and newborn granddaughter, but he had no choice. The survival of the colony depended on it. In the fall of 1587, John White set sail back to England, promising to return as soon as possible. But fate had other plans. When White arrived in England, he found the country gripped by war. Spain's mighty armada threatened invasion, and every English ship was requisitioned for defence. No vessel could be spared for a relief mission to Roanoke. White was forced to wait. Days turned into months, and months into years. Finally, in 1590, 3 long years later, John White managed to secure passage back to the New World. His heart raced as his ship approached the familiar shores of Roanoke. But the scene that awaited him was like something from a nightmare. The settlement was empty, houses dismantled. No smoke rising from chimneys, no voices, no footprints. It was as though time itself had swallowed the colony whole. Then White saw it carved into a wooden post, the word Croatoan. On another tree, a single carving, CRO. White's heart pounded. Before he had left in 1587, he had agreed with the settlers that if they ever decided to relocate, they would carve the name of their destination into a tree. If they were in danger, they'd add a cross above it. There was no cross, only the word Croatoan. Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, home to a friendly tribe that had once helped the English. White was hopeful. Perhaps the colonists had simply moved there. He urged his crew to sail immediately to Croatoan Island, but fate struck again. A fierce storm erupted, forcing them back to sea. The ship's captain refused to risk further damage, and White, heartbroken, helpless, was carried away from the coast, never to see Roanoke again. He returned to England, haunted by the mystery for the rest of his life. He never found out what happened to his daughter, his granddaughter, or the 115 others who had vanished. For centuries, historians and archaeologists have searched for answers. Theories abound, but none fully explain the disappearance. Some say the settlers were killed by hostile tribes. Others claim they tried to sail back to England and drowned. A few believe they were absorbed into the Croatoan tribe itself, adopting native customs and vanishing into history. But the story doesn't end there. In the centuries that followed, strange clues continued to surface. Reports emerged of native tribes with grey eyes and English features, descendants perhaps of Roanoke settlers. In 1607, when the Jamestown colony was founded just a few hundred miles north, explorers heard rumours of white-skinned natives living inland, people who could speak broken English and used tools unfamiliar to the tribes. Then there were the Dare Stones. Beginning in the 1930s, a series of carved stones were discovered across the Carolinas and Georgia. The first stone bore an inscription said to be from Eleanor Dare herself, describing the deaths of the colonists and the murder of her husband and daughter. The final plea read, "Anye Englishman show John White Gover of Virginia, I have come here alone, EWD." For years these stones stirred excitement. Could they be the final message from the lost colonists? But skepticism grew. Many of the stones were later proven to be forgeries. Still, some historians believe the first stone might be genuine, a desperate cry carved by Eleanor Dare before she vanished forever. The mystery deepened. Archaeological digs on Roanoke and Hatteras Islands unearthed tantalizing hints: broken pottery, European tools, fragments of armor. Some artifacts matched the style of the late 1500s, suggesting that the colonists may indeed have relocated southward. But if they did, why no written records? No graves? No survivors? The lost colony became more than a historical puzzle. It became a haunting symbol of America's beginnings, a ghost story that mark the threshold between hope and tragedy. Imagine the silence of that island, wind sweeping through empty trees, waves crashing against the shore, the ghosts of settlers wandering through the ruins of their dream. Even today, the forests of Roanoke hold secrets. Some locals claim strange lights flicker at night. Others swear they've heard whispers in the woods, voices calling faintly for help. What if the colonists didn't die at all? What if they simply became something else, absorbed into the ancient land itself, their English blood mixing with native roots, disappearing not by death, but by transformation? Modern DNA studies have tried to trace the truth. Some descendants of Native American tribes in the Carolinas do carry markers that link them to early European ancestry, centuries before Jamestown. Coincidence, or proof that the Roanoke settlers lived on? The word Croatoan has since taken on an eerie life of its own. It appears throughout American folklore, whispered in tales of disappearance. When the writer Edgar Allan Poe was found delirious before his death in 1849, some claim his last words were Croatoan. In 1937, a plane disappeared near Croatoan Island. In 1939, a mysterious shipwreck was found with the word Croatoan carved into its mast. Coincidences or echoes of a curse that began in 1587? The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere between history and legend. What we know for certain is this: the Lost Colony of Roanoke was the first English attempt at settlement in the New World, and it ended in silence. But that silence gave birth to America's oldest mystery. As centuries pass, the ocean continues to erode the coastline where the colony once stood. Soon the last traces of Roanoke may vanish forever beneath the waves. And yet, the question remains: what happened to the 117 men, women, and children who dared to build a new world, only to disappear without a sound? Perhaps even now their voices are carried by the wind that whispers through the Carolina pines, repeating the one word they left behind. When news of the vanished colony finally reached England, it fell upon deaf ears. The country had changed in those 3 years John White spent stranded by circumstance. England's victory over the Spanish Armada had turned the Queen's attention elsewhere. Funding, ships, and political will to search for 117 missing settlers simply did not exist. But for White, it was a wound that never healed. The man who had once painted the bright colours of the New World now lived in the grey shadows of guilt. He had abandoned his daughter and granddaughter to a fate he could not comprehend. Every night, as the wind howled across English shores, he must have wondered if, across the ocean, his family still lived, or if their bones had already turned to dust beneath the Carolina pines. He pleaded with Raleigh for another rescue mission. Raleigh, though sympathetic, was weighed down by his own troubles. Accused of treason, burdened by debt, his grand dreams of empire were collapsing. In time, the Lost Colony of Roanoke slipped from royal priority into the quiet margins of history. Yet the story refused to die. Whispers passed from sailor to sailor, explorer to explorer. The tale of a ghost colony in the New World became a legend, one that would haunt generations. In 1602, an English privateer named Bartholomew Gilbert attempted to locate the colony, but his crew was ambushed and killed near the Virginia coast. Whatever clues he might have found died with him. 5 years later, when settlers established Jamestown, the first successful English colony in America, many of them carried with them the ghost of Roanoke, the memory of what had gone wrong. Captain John Smith of Jamestown, curious and cautious, asked local tribes about the lost settlers. Some told him they knew of white men who had lived inland, building houses of stone, dressing in strange clothes. Others said the colonists had been attacked and killed, but no physical evidence was ever found. Still, the reports intrigued Smith enough to send scouts south. They never found survivors, but they did find strange traces: European tools, fragments of armour, and stories of children with light hair among certain native villages. The pieces of the puzzle multiplied, but the picture remained blurred. Historians began to see Roanoke not as a single mystery, but as a crossroads of many possibilities. One theory suggests that the settlers, desperate for survival, split into smaller groups, some joining the Croatoan tribe on Hatteras Island, others pushing inland towards the Chesapeake Bay, where Raleigh had originally planned to settle. Another theory argues that they were wiped out by the Powhatan Confederacy after tensions escalated between English newcomers and native tribes. The Powhatan themselves later claimed to have slaughtered a group of white men living with the Chesapeake tribe. If true, it might explain why no settlers were ever found alive, but it raises another question. Why was there no sign of their remains at Roanoke? Some scholars point to the geography itself. Roanoke Island is a fragile spit of land between the mainland and the Outer Banks, constantly reshaped by storms and tides. Entire settlements could have been washed away by hurricanes or eroded into the sea. The ocean that once brought them hope may have swallowed their final traces. Yet others see something deeper, something almost poetic. Perhaps Roanoke wasn't a failure, but a transformation. Perhaps in blending with native peoples, the colonists became the first true Americans, merging two worlds long before the nation itself was born. Centuries later, the legend of Roanoke continued to evolve. It became part of America's cultural DNA, a story retold in classrooms, novels, and even ghost tales whispered beside campfires. Each retelling reflected the fears and hopes of its time. In the 19th century, when expansion westward defined the national spirit, Roanoke was seen as a warning, the price of overreaching ambition. In the 20th century, amid war and uncertainty, it became a metaphor for loss and disappearance. In 1937, on the 350th anniversary of the colony's founding, a grand outdoor drama premiered in North Carolina, The Lost Colony, written by playwright Paul Green. The play imagined the settlers' struggles, their hope, and their ultimate vanishing. It ended with the haunting image of Virginia Dare, the newborn child, calling out across time, symbolizing the undying spirit of exploration. The play became a tradition, still performed every summer under the open sky where the colony once stood. But historians wanted facts, not legends, and facts were buried deep, sometimes literally. In recent decades, archaeologists have returned to Roanoke with tools more precise than ever. They've combed the soil for traces of 16th century English life, ceramics, tools, weapon fragments, even beads that match the trade goods of the original settlers. In 2012, a breakthrough came when researchers studying John White's original map noticed something extraordinary. Under ultraviolet light, they discovered that White had drawn a small patch, an invisible correction, over an inland location about 50 miles west of Roanoke. Beneath it was the faint outline of a fort, labelled simply Site X. Some scholars now believe this may have been where part of the colony relocated, a hidden refuge inland. Excavations at that site near the Albemarle Sound uncovered European artifacts consistent with the 1580s. Broken pottery, a gun lock, a slate writing tablet. Nothing definitive, but enough to suggest that at least some of the Roanoke settlers may have survived there, living among native allies for a time. And then, silence again. The earth offers only fragments, no diary, no skeletons, no ruins large enough to tell the whole story. The lost colony remains just that. Lost. Even as modern science steps in, DNA testing, ground-penetrating radar, isotope analysis, the answers remain elusive. Every discovery opens new questions. Some genetic studies hint that members of certain Carolina tribes, such as the Lumbee, may carry traces of European lineage dating back before Jamestown. Could they be descendants of Roanoke survivors? Or simply evidence of later contact with Europeans? No one can say for sure. The mystery endures not because we lack evidence, but because Roanoke represents something larger than itself. It embodies the human story, the eternal struggle between hope and despair, discovery and disappearance. Imagine it now, a small group of weary settlers standing on a wild shore, the endless forests stretching before them, the waves roaring behind. They've crossed an ocean for a dream, and that dream is unraveling. Hunger gnaws, storms rage, the native allies turn uncertain. They look to John White, their leader, as he promises to return with help. He sails away, his ship vanishing over the horizon. Days pass, then weeks, then years, and still no sails appear on the horizon. At what point did they realize they'd been abandoned? Did they wait year after year, carving Croatoan into the wood not as a clue, but as a final whisper of identity? This is where we were, this is who we were. The thought is almost unbearable. For the settlers, Roanoke was not just a colony, it was their world. They had carried England across the sea, its customs, its language, its faith, and yet, on that lonely island surrounded by wilderness, those things must have seemed to fade until the new world swallowed them whole. Their disappearance then becomes symbolic. Roanoke marks the moment when the old world first touched the new, and neither remained unchanged. It was the seed of a nation, buried in mystery. Even today, visitors to Roanoke Island speak of a strange atmosphere, an almost sacred quiet. The forests hum with life, but there's a weight in the air, as if the past lingers just out of sight. The sound of the wind through the trees can almost resemble whispers. Some say, if you listen closely, you can hear the faint cries of settlers calling across centuries, their story unfinished. And maybe that's why we can't let it go. Every generation searches again, hoping to be the one to solve it, to find the missing clue, the buried evidence, the final proof of what happened. But maybe the power of the Roanoke mystery lies not in its solution, but in its persistence. It reminds us how fragile history can be, how entire worlds can vanish, leaving only questions carved into wood. As the 21st century unfolds, technology continues to push the boundaries of discovery. Archaeologists use drones to scan the shifting coastline. Historians cross-reference colonial letters, ship logs, and oral traditions. Computer models simulate weather patterns from 1587, suggesting that a massive hurricane may have struck that autumn, perhaps scattering the settlers to their doom. And yet, the story remains open-ended, like a door slightly ajar. Perhaps one day the Earth will give up its secret, a grave uncovered, a document unearthed, a genetic link confirmed. Or perhaps Roanoke will forever remain America's original ghost story, whispered in classrooms, dramatized on screens, and kept alive by curiosity. Because Roanoke is not just about loss, it's about the courage to begin, even when the ending is uncertain. It's about the yearning that drove 117 souls to cross an ocean for a dream of freedom, a dream that would outlive them all. And maybe in that sense, the colonists didn't vanish. Maybe they became the myth that inspired everything that followed, the pioneers, the explorers, the restless spirit that built a nation. As the sun sets over the outer banks, the wind stirs the tall grass where the fort once stood. The tide creeps in, washing over the sand, erasing footprints no one has seen for centuries. Somewhere beneath that shifting earth lie the traces of those who came first, the lost, the forgotten, the brave. Their story ends not in certainty, but in wonder. And as darkness falls, one word seems to echo still: